All right, what's going on, Sooner Nation? So I saw some guys enter the transfer portal at a position where maybe Oklahoma could afford to take one more guy with one of those open scholarship spots, and it was at the wide receiver position. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting name. And then figured we really haven't talked about this wide receiver position outside of the guys that Oklahoma recently landed. And, if Oklahoma needs to take anybody else. So today I want to discuss that. I want to hear from y'all. So join the discussion, jump in the comments below, give me your thoughts, just as I'm kind of giving you mine. And if you're new to the channel, hit that like, wipe your feet, and hit the subscribe button. Let me know what you guys think about this content. Really helps keep the channel free. And listen, as we start to head into recruiting season, we're going to bringing you guys a ton of recruiting info. We're working on getting Felix Ojo here on the podcast, the 5-star offensive tackle that Oklahoma is probably going to be heavily pursuing in this 2026 class, and we'll work on getting other guys on as well. So you don't want to miss any of that content. But today I want to talk about a Penn State wide receiver, and you might have actually seen multiple Penn State wide receivers enter the transfer portal, which is interesting because Penn State really needs some help at that position. Drew Aller is, some people are out on whether he's going to be a good quarterback or not, especially if he ends up trying to go to the next level. But they lost two of their leading wide receivers. You're obviously losing that tight end to the NFL draft, but the guy's name is Harrison Wallace III. He's a junior this year, and he comes in at 6'1", 199 pounds. Now, he's originally from Montgomery, Alabama, but this past season, he had a total of 46 receptions, 720 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a 15.7-yard average. And through his career, he's been about a 250-ish yard type of wide receiver, averaging about 20 receptions. Averaging 19 receptions and 1 touchdown a year. But this is a guy that, with the size, with the speed, he's intriguing, right? He's an interesting prospect. Now, obviously, if you're Oklahoma, you've gotten several wide receivers out of the transfer portal, and I think you've bolstered this position up a little bit better. I think you're prepared for next season. Obviously, though, I think there's a lot of unproven talent at the wide receiver position, and so Oklahoma fans are kind of wanting to see some of these bigger transfers, which is why I mentioned a guy like this, because he doesn't come from an FCS school. He doesn't come from the G5 ranks, right? He'd come for the Big Ten ranks. This is what Oklahoma fans are asking for, but he doesn't necessarily have the production from the Power 4 rankings that I think a lot of people would want. So the deal is with Harrison Wallace III, where Oklahoma could potentially get involved, and one where I would be intrigued to see Oklahoma get involved. A school like Texas, I feel like, would have to be heavily involved, especially after what they're losing to the draft. Although they've restocked with young talent, they might want to get an older veteran like this in that room. Georgia's obviously been on a tear when it comes to wide receiver recruiting. And then Alabama is a school that I think is going to actually be in the market for a wide receiver as well, because they've lost a couple in the transfer portal, and it always helps to have veteran wide receivers like this in the transfer portal. Now, obviously, if you're Oklahoma, you lost a lot of size this portal cycle. You brought in some guys where, yeah, you've got some size like a Giovanni Gibson, but, some guys like a Satanga or guys like that, they don't have, the over 6 foot size. And the guy that's 6'1", I think would play for you. The question is, what kind of production are you going to get out of a guy like this? He only has 4 drops this season, so it's not terrible, but he's not a guy that's necessarily going to play in the slot. He's going to play a little bit wide, but overall, when it came to drops, he had a 68.8% grade, which was decent, not the best, not the greatest. Receiving grade, he had a 73.1. He had an overall 73.1 offensive grade as well this season for the Penn State Nittany Lions. His best game came against West Virginia at West Virginia, where he caught 8 targets, or no, he caught 5 receptions on 8 targets for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then against Purdue, he had a touchdown there for 54 yards. Overall, this was a guy that was probably a sub-100 wide receiver every single game this year. But I think this is a guy that, if he came to Oklahoma, maybe Emmett Jones could, just kind of like we talked about with Denver Harris the other day. Maybe Emmett Jones gets the most out of a guy like this. Now, Outside of Harrison Wallace, a name that, potentially keeps circling around, somebody you're watching, Keon Brown, the 6'3" sophomore coming out of JUCO college, originally from Tallahassee, Florida. This was a guy that Oklahoma got in that 2023 class, ultimately ended up not being able to sign with Oklahoma and had to go the JUCO route. You're starting to hear a lot of noise with Florida in this recruitment. And this was one and I still think to this day, if EMT Jones and the staff were to tell him, you've got a spot at Oklahoma, they could probably go out there and land Keon Brown. The ultimate thing here is, does Oklahoma want to wait till the spring portal to pick up another wide receiver? Like, you still have two teams that are playing in the national championship, where if a guy off one of those teams enters the transfer portal, maybe Oklahoma would be interested in going and grabbing somebody. So you look at a guy like Keon Brown. Obviously, I don't think it's going to happen at this point in time, just because I think the timeline for that is a little bit far out. Maybe an in-state school like the Florida Gators or the Florida State Seminoles could be more in of a player for Keon Brown. And in fact, I have heard the Florida Gators name, which is part of the reason why I brought them up. But ultimately, if Oklahoma doesn't go out there and get anybody else at the wide receiver position here in the 26 class, I think you're okay with what they have taken in the transfer portal, and then just focusing on what they go out there and grab the 26 cycle, like maybe a Mason James, who's just right down the road at Norman North, and a kid that I'm not going to say is Elijah Thomas, but kind of has, a similar feel in terms of the way that he can take over a game at the high school level. And being an in-state kid, I think a lot of people would like to see him end up here on the team. So ultimately, I think Oklahoma's in a decent spot. I think they could still hit somebody in the spring cycle. The wide receiver room, I think, is a little bit easier to integrate somebody a little late, just because if the kid is a little bit more senior, tenured, he's going to understand how to pick up those routes. More than likely, he's going to have ran some of these routes before, and it should be a little bit easier to integrate them in. And likely, whoever you're pulling in at this point in time is not going to be a starter, right? They're going to be a good rotational piece, but not someone that is, I think, moving the needle. I think even as Zachariah Branch, right? You get him in to Oklahoma, where he ultimately ended up going to Georgia. But if you got him into Oklahoma, I don't know if he moves the needle enough to actually end up being a starter at Oklahoma. He probably just would have been a really good rotational piece behind Deion Burks, who Oklahoma, I would expects a big season out of him next year. So I want to hear from y'all. So join the discussion, jump in the comments below, give me your thoughts on this potential wide receiver target for Oklahoma. If you guys have not already, make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe button. I want you guys to be a part of the community, always getting up to date on some of this news, and definitely on the recruiting trail as this news starts to pick back up and the staff really starts to focus on the 2026 cycle. They're on the road, they're recruiting kids, throwing offers out. So we're going to have a lot of those updates, especially as junior days are here. So hit that like, wipe your feet, and hit that subscribe button.